Welcome to True Echo, where real voices meet powerful truths. In today's story, two black teenagers board a flight with tickets gifted by their father, a top CEO, only to be told they don't belong in first class. But with one phone call, the narrative flips and justice takes flight. This isn't just a story about discrimination. It's about dignity, courage, and what happens when truth refuses to be silenced. The cabin of the Boeing 787 was a haven of hushed elegance, dressed in soft lighting and whispering leather seats. Olivia Carter adjusted her seatbelt, her fingers trembling slightly with excitement. She glanced to her left where her twin brother, Elijah, reclined just enough to enjoy the view outside. It was their first flight alone. No nannies, no assistants, no father watching over them. Just the two of them, 15 years old and headed from New York to San Francisco, tucked into seats 1A and 1B. These seats hadn't come easy. Not in price and certainly not in meaning. Their father, Michael Carter, founder and CEO of Global Tech, had gifted them this journey as a rite of passage. Independence begins when no one holds your hand, he had said. But that doesn't mean you bow when someone tries to take what's rightfully yours. So far, everything felt magical. The stewardess had addressed them formally, Mr. and Miss Carter, and offered orange juice in real glass cups. The plane wasn't even in the air yet, but already they could feel the weight of their surnames settling around them like armor and expectation. Until the air shifted. Elijah noticed the change first, the firm echo of footsteps in the plush aisle. Then the scent of sharp perfume mixed with entitlement. A white woman in her 50s, dressed in a designer trench coat and polished heels, stood towering beside them. Karen Mitchell. The name would become infamous by the end of that flight. "I believe you're in my seat," she said, her tone clipped, chin raised as if she'd stepped out of a courtroom, not an airline cabin. Olivia blinked. "Pardon?" "These are my seats," Karen said again, gesturing stiffly at 1A and 1B. "I always sit here. Every time. There must be a mistake." Elijah opened his mouth, but the flight attendant approached, her face already tense. "Miss Mitchell," the attendant said gently, "your seat is 3A. Seats 1A and 1B are confirmed for the Carter twins." Karen's face stiffened. "Carter? Never heard of them. Look, I'm Platinum Elite. I don't sit in the third row. That's practically economy." The attendant hesitated. "I'm sorry, but the manifest is clear." Karen's eyes narrowed as she turned back to the twins. "Then they should move. I mean, they're kids. What's the problem with that?" The words hit like frost. Elijah's hand gripped the armrest tighter. Olivia felt her pulse race. "With all due respect," Elijah said calmly, "we have our boarding passes. These seats were bought, not borrowed. You're welcome to double-check with the gate staff." But Karen didn't check. She didn't move. Her voice rose instead, loud enough for other passengers to hear. "This is what happens when anyone with a gold card thinks they're important. I've been flying Skyline for 14 years. These kids don't belong in my seat." Her emphasis on the word, "these," wasn't lost on anyone. And still, no one stood up. No other passenger said a word. The flight attendant gave a look of uncertainty, then murmured, "Let me call my supervisor." Karen crossed her arms and stood firm, as if waiting for the universe to reorient itself around her demands. Beside Elijah, Olivia took a breath. "She's not going to stop," she whispered. "No," Elijah replied. "But neither are we." By the time the flight supervisor, Laura Evans, arrived at the scene, the luxurious ambience of first class had been eclipsed by tension so thick it felt like turbulence before takeoff. Laura was composed, middle-aged, and wore her senior badge with the calm confidence of someone used to diffusing conflict. But what she walked into wasn't just a seating dispute, it was a collision of dignity, discrimination, and authority. "Good afternoon," Laura said, voice crisp as she addressed the passengers. "I understand there's been a concern about seating arrangements?" Karen stepped forward like a plaintiff before a judge. "Concern? No, this is an outrage. I've flown Skyline Airways for years. These are my seats. Always have been. The system must have glitched." Laura raised her tablet. "I've checked the booking log. Seats 1A and 1B were purchased 2 weeks ago under the name Michael Carter, for Elijah and Olivia Carter. It's all in order." Karen's jaw clenched. "Michael Carter? That's the CEO of Global Tech, isn't it?" "Yes, ma'am," Laura replied. Karen's laughter was dry, venomous. "So now corporate brats are taking priority over loyal customers?" The comment rippled through the cabin. Olivia's lips parted, her breath catching in disbelief. Elijah sat straighter, locking eyes with the woman, his voice even. "Miss Mitchell, with all due respect, This isn't about loyalty or who our father is. It's about a confirmed seat assignment. But Laura hesitated. She glanced from Karen to the twins and back again, a flicker of something uncertain in her expression. She stepped aside and whispered to a nearby attendant. Within moments, a second staff member emerged from the galley with printed seating documents in hand, unmistakably marked with the Carters' names. Still, Laura didn't close the matter. "You have to understand," she began, speaking now to Elijah and Olivia. "Miss Mitchell has been flying with us for years. This is an unusual situation. Perhaps we can find a compromise." Olivia's head tilted slowly, her voice composed but firm. "Ma'am, you're asking us to give up our legal seats for the comfort of someone simply used to getting her way?" "I'm asking for flexibility," Laura replied carefully. "No," Elijah interjected, his words deliberate. "You're asking us to surrender our rights so you can avoid confrontation." Karen's eyes lit with triumph, sensing the power tipping in her favor. "I'll take my seat now," she said smugly, reaching for Olivia's headrest. But before she could touch it, Olivia stood. "You're not taking anything," Olivia said, not with aggression, but with a grace sharp enough to cut. "You're trying to erase us in the most polite way possible. But I won't be erased." The cabin fell still. Passengers began to murmur softly, some peeking over headrests, others watching the unfolding scene with interest disguised as concern. Not one voice had joined theirs. "Not yet." Karen folded her arms, lips twitching with a sneer. "Maybe they should learn some humility." "They've learned dignity," a deep voice finally said. It came from an older man in seat 1D, his gray beard framing a stern face. He leaned forward, placing his hand on the armrest as he spoke. "And they've shown more composure in 10 minutes than some adults do in a lifetime." Karen turned to glare at him. "This isn't your business." "It became all our business the moment you made it about more than just a seat," he replied. Laura shifted uncomfortably. A line had been crossed, not just ethical but moral. Still, instead of defusing the situation, she turned to her attendant. "Check for any other seats we can offer the Carter children." That was the breaking point. Elijah slowly reached into the inner pocket of his blazer and pulled out his phone. "I didn't want to do this," he said under his breath to Olivia. "But they're not listening to reason." She nodded once. Elijah stepped toward the privacy curtain at the front of the cabin. A junior flight attendant met him there, concern etched on her youthful face. Without a word, she granted him space. Elijah dialed the number with shaking fingers, not from fear but from restraint about to give way. Michael Carter answered on the second ring. "Elijah?" "Dad," Elijah said. "We need help." The moment the call ended, the shift in momentum was immediate. Elijah returned to his seat, sat down and simply said, "Wait." And wait they did. Back in Global Tech's Manhattan headquarters, Michael Carter, a man known for unshakable composure and multi-billion-dollar decisions, stood alone in his office, staring out at the skyline with fury in his bones. His children had done exactly as he taught them, with courage, respect, and clarity. But now it was time for him to do his part. He made one call. And on that plane, wheels not yet off the tarmac, the system braced for a storm it hadn't expected. Inside the aircraft, the quiet tension had become unbearable. No one knew what Elijah had said on the phone, but everyone could feel the charge in the air shift. Karen Mitchell, oblivious to the deeper consequences now forming outside the plane, remained planted like a judge in court, arms crossed, mouth pursed, and eyes drilling into the back of Olivia's seat like she could will the girl out of existence. The plane hadn't moved. The doors were still open. The engine still quiet. And then footsteps. Not the soft glide of attendants. Not the careful patter of boarding passengers. These were decisive, firm, echoing down the aisle like a summons. Two men entered the cabin in black suits, IDs clipped neatly to their lapels, their faces unreadable. Their arrival was like a sudden gust of wind that made the entire atmosphere tilt on its axis. "Robert Evans," the older one said, his voice clear and sharp. "Regional Operations. This is Matthew Hughes, Director of In-Flight Compliance. We're here under orders from Chairman Callahan." Flight Supervisor Laura Evans paled. "We weren't expecting." "We know," Robert cut in. "That's why we're here." They turned to Elijah and Olivia. "You must be the Carter children," Robert said with a nod, his voice instantly softer, almost apologetic. Olivia offered a quiet nod. Elijah stood up. "Yes, sir. We're in the seats our father booked." Robert turned slowly to Karen Mitchell. "And you are?" Karen straightened. "Karen Mitchell. Platinum Elite. You might recognize the name." "We do," Matthew said. Unfortunately, we recognize the behavior too. Karen bristled. Excuse me? Miss Mitchell, Robert said, holding up a printed list. Our passenger manifest confirms that seats 1A and 1B were purchased and assigned 2 weeks ago to Elijah and Olivia Carter. Your seat is listed as 3A. We have confirmation of payment, timestamps, and seat mapping. Laura tried to step forward, murmuring, "We were just trying to de-escalate by displacing the rightful passengers?" Matthew said, his eyes like twin scalpels. That's not de-escalation. That's complicity. Karen's face drained of color. But she wasn't done. This is unbelievable, she snapped. I've brought in hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue for this airline. I've sat in that seat for over a decade. These are kids. They'll forget this tomorrow. Exactly, Robert said. They're kids. And you made them fight for something that was already theirs. Passengers nearby began to shift, leaning in. Some with sympathy, some with curiosity, all alert now to the fact that this wasn't just some petty squabble over seat assignments. This was an inflection point, and Karen, for once, was no longer in control of the room. Robert stepped forward. Miss Mitchell, due to your behavior and violation of Passenger Conduct Code, your Platinum Elite status with Skyline Airways is revoked effective immediately. The words hung in the air like broken glass. Karen froze. You can't. We can, Matthew said calmly. And we have. Karen's mouth opened, then shut again. Her eyes darted around the cabin, searching for allies. None came. Even the crew had stepped back, no longer offering her refuge. Olivia sat tall. She wasn't gloating. But her eyes no longer trembled. Her fingers no longer clutched the armrest. Justice had spoken. Elijah looked up at the men, expression calm. Thank you. Robert nodded. Don't thank us. You shouldn't have had to go through this at all. Karen took a step back, and for a brief moment she looked small. Not because of the loss of her status, but because for the first time someone had said, no, and it stuck. The final blow came when the plane's door reopened, just as it had moments before. This time it wasn't boarding passengers or airline executives. It was Captain James Patterson. He stepped into the cabin with the calm precision of a man who'd seen combat, not just in the air but in the human ego. I've been made aware of the situation, he said, his voice carrying like steel beneath velvet. And I want to make something clear. On my aircraft, age and skin color are not grounds for eviction. Disruption is. He turned to Karen. If you continue to resist, I'll have airport security escort you off the flight. Karen didn't speak. She just stared, not in defiance but in disbelief. Captain Patterson gave a final nod to the twins. Thank you for your patience. Then he returned to the cockpit. Karen shuffled back to seat 3A without a word. And for the first time in nearly an hour, the entire cabin exhaled. Not in triumph, but in relief. The engines hummed to life. And Elijah and Olivia Carter, seated once again in 1A and 1B, looked at each other with a quiet kind of pride. The lesson had been painful. Public. But it had been heard. As the aircraft finally began to taxi toward the runway, the murmurs in the cabin tapered off into silence once again. Not the charged kind that had gripped the air before, but something softer, more reflective. In seats 1A and 1B, Elijah and Olivia sat side by side, neither speaking, but both knowing they'd just lived through something much larger than a seating dispute. The overhead lights dimmed to a calm blue. The seatbelt sign chimed on. And yet, even with the smooth rumble of forward momentum, a strange stillness remained around them, like everyone was waiting to see if the chaos would resume. But Karen Mitchell, now stripped of her Platinum Elite status and relocated to 3A, sat with her eyes cast down, her pride deflated like a punctured balloon. Her presence remained a shadow behind the curtain separating the front cabin, but her voice, once a whip, was now just silence. Elijah leaned toward Olivia and whispered, "Do you think she'll try something again?" Olivia's eyes stayed focused on the window. "She's not the problem anymore." Elijah followed her gaze, to the darkening runway stretching out before them. "She thought we wouldn't stand up," Olivia added after a moment. "She thought we were just kids." Elijah nodded. "She didn't think we'd be heard. But someone had listened." On the 58th floor of Global Tech's Manhattan headquarters, Michael Carter stood alone, hands clasped behind his back, watching the flight data update live on a wall-mounted screen. His expression wasn't smug, nor even angry anymore, it was something more solemn. He'd spent his life building power through innovation, diplomacy, and billions in revenue. But this was the first time that power had needed to show up for something that couldn't be measured in metrics: the dignity of his children. His phone buzzed. It was James Callahan, CEO of Skyline Airways. Michael answered on the first ring. "It's been handled," James said without hesitation. "Robert, Matthew, and even Patterson, everyone was aligned. The situation is fully under control. Karen Mitchell has been warned, penalized, and removed from any preferential status. Your children were unshakable." Michael didn't respond right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but layered with gravity. "I don't want my children to be treated better than others," he said. "But I will never tolerate them being treated worse." Callahan exhaled. "Understood." Loud and clear. "And for what it's worth, we're launching a review. Full policy audit. Cultural sensitivity training. Public statement. Everything." "I'm not asking for a press release," Michael replied. "I'm asking for a precedent." Callahan paused. "Then that's what we'll create." Back on board, the cabin had begun to settle. The new team of attendants, brought in following the suspension of Laura and Jack, moved professionally through the aisles, checking seatbelts, smiling softly, as if trying to reset the mood without pretending the last hour hadn't happened. In 1D, the older man who had spoken earlier leaned toward the twins again. "May I?" he asked quietly. They both nodded. "My name's Harold," he said. "Former civil rights lawyer. Retired but still watching the world closely." He looked them each in the eye. "What you did today, that wasn't just brave. That was necessary." Elijah offered a polite smile. "Thank you, sir." "No," Harold said, shaking his head. "You don't understand. A lot of people in this cabin won't forget what they saw. And more importantly, what they didn't do." Olivia glanced sideways. "You mean, how no one spoke up?" Harold didn't flinch. "That silence? It wasn't just fear. It was comfort. People think silence protects them. But sometimes, it just protects the wrong thing." His words lingered. Olivia looked down at her lap. "We didn't know it would go this far," she said. "We just didn't want to be disrespected." "And that," Harold said, "is exactly how change begins." From behind, a soft voice interrupted. A young woman, maybe in her early 30s, dressed in business attire, leaned over the armrest from row 2C. "I'm sorry I didn't say anything earlier," she said. "I was afraid of drawing attention. But I watched everything. And I just want to say, thank you." Elijah looked at her and nodded once. "You just did say something." The woman smiled and sat back, eyes slightly misty. It wasn't just Elijah and Olivia who had found their voices on that flight. Slowly, quietly, others were beginning to find theirs too. Across the cabin, another woman, a mother with a small child curled up beside her, made eye contact with Olivia. She mouthed a simple thank you before gently stroking her daughter's hair and resting her head back. Not one loud cheer. No standing ovations. But respect. Felt. Sure. As the aircraft finally lifted off the runway, the gentle hum of takeoff wrapped around the cabin like a promise. The sky outside turned a deeper blue, then shifted toward velvet, streaked with clouds reflecting a glow from the setting sun. The city disappeared beneath them, and with it, the heavy tension that had once poisoned the space. Elijah exhaled. "We're flying now." Olivia smiled faintly, still gazing out the window. "Yeah. And not just in the air." The sky beyond the cabin windows had deepened into a velvety indigo by the time the flight reached cruising altitude. The hum of the engines smoothed into a gentle, constant rhythm. Passengers began to relax into the hush of the evening flight, reading, sipping drinks, or simply staring out at the cloud-draped horizon. But in the first row, seats 1A and 1B, there was no relaxing just yet. Elijah and Olivia sat still, not out of fear, but from the quiet aftermath of adrenaline slowly draining from their bodies. The war was over, but the echoes lingered, Karen's cutting remarks, the silence of the passengers, the initial hesitation from the crew. Even though justice had finally been served, they could still feel the residue of it on their skin like dust not yet brushed off. "You okay?" Elijah asked, finally breaking the silence between them. Olivia nodded, her voice low. "I keep thinking, what if we hadn't said anything?" Elijah glanced at her, then back at the cabin. "Then Karen would be sitting here. And we'd be back there wondering why we let her win." There was a long pause. "I don't want to get used to fighting for what's ours," Olivia whispered. "You shouldn't have to," a voice said from across the aisle. It was Richard Bennett. The regional director had removed his suit jacket and now stood in his shirt sleeves, expression softer than before. He stepped closer, crouching slightly beside them. "You two taught us something today," he said. "You didn't raise your voice. You didn't insult anyone. But you didn't back down either." We shouldn't have had to teach anyone, Elijah replied, not bitterly, but with a sincerity that struck deep. Richard nodded. You're right. But sometimes it takes a moment like this to show people how broken things are. Skyline isn't going to pretend this didn't happen. You're going public? Olivia asked. We're not sweeping anything under the rug, he said. We're issuing a formal apology. Training programs. A full audit of how our staff responds to discriminatory incidents. And yes, your story will be a part of it. If you allow it. The twins exchanged a glance. Olivia nodded slowly. Only if it helps the next kid. Not for credit. That's all we want, Richard said. To make sure no one else has to carry the weight you two did. He stood and gave a slight bow of respect before moving down the aisle, checking on the rest of the cabin. It wasn't long before another figure approached, the woman from 2C who had whispered thanks earlier. She leaned slightly toward them again. Sorry to interrupt, she said, her voice humble. I wanted to say something earlier, but I didn't feel brave enough. You don't need to apologize, Elijah said gently. I do though, she said. I work in education policy. I spend every day advocating for equity and representation. But when I saw it happening in front of me, in real time, I froze. You spoke up eventually, Olivia said. That's more than most. The woman gave a grateful smile. You reminded me that silence is a choice. And next time, I'll choose better. She returned to her seat, but her words stayed. Next time, choose better. Later, as drinks were being served, a different attendant approached, this time with a folded piece of paper in hand. This just came through from our main office, she said quietly to Elijah. He took the note and opened it. Inside was a printed message, brief and powerful. Dear Elijah and Olivia, I've just concluded a meeting with the airline CEO. Your integrity and calm today restored something many of us forgot we had, the courage to speak when it matters. Your seats are not only rightfully yours, but now permanently reserved for any future Skyline flight under the Carter name. With deep respect, Michael Carter. Olivia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Dad didn't just make a call, she said softly. He made a statement. He made sure the silence didn't win, Elijah added. Across the cabin, Karen Mitchell hadn't moved in nearly an hour. She stared ahead, hollow and fuming in the shadows of her own collapse. Her hands remained clutched on her designer purse, but her influence was gone, revoked, and replaced with silence of a different kind, the kind born not of power but of consequence. And this time no one reached out to her. No warm apology. No excuses. No whispers of support. Her gaze flicked toward the twins only once, when Olivia turned slightly and met her eyes, not with anger, but with something far more painful, calm dignity. Karen looked away. By the time dinner service rolled through the cabin, the tension had melted into quiet normalcy. Elijah and Olivia ate slowly, not out of hunger but necessity, each forkful grounding them again. This feels different now, Olivia said, pushing her tray aside. Yeah, Elijah murmured. Like something shifted. And it had. Not just for them, but for everyone watching. The flight moved steadily through the night sky, high above the clouds where the turbulence of injustice had finally calmed. Though hours had passed since the incident, its weight still lingered in the cabin, not like a bruise, but more like a scar already beginning to form over something deeper. Elijah leaned his head against the window, watching as the horizon blurred into inky blue and soft flashes of light flickered far below. Somewhere beneath them, cities bustled, unaware that something transformative had just happened in the quiet of a luxury jet cabin. A lesson had been delivered, not from the airline, not from the loudest voice, but from two teenagers who chose silence without submission and dignity without retreat. Behind them, passengers moved carefully, respectfully. The usual chatter and clinking of drink glasses were there, but now softened, more deliberate. Several glances continued to land on the twins, not invasive but watchful, reverent. Something had changed and everyone knew it. From row 1D, Harold, the retired civil rights lawyer, leaned over again. You two are going to change more than a policy. Elijah looked up. We didn't plan on changing anything. We just didn't want to be pushed out. Harold smiled, eyes kind but sharp. That's exactly why it worked. You didn't scream or play victim. You told the truth. And truth, when spoken with calm conviction, forces people to listen, especially those who don't want to. A few rows behind, a quiet voice added, "He's right." It was the older woman who had turned away earlier during Karen's tirade. She stood now, clutching a book in one hand and a small pin in the other, a faded silver emblem that read, Freedom Rider 1961. I've lived long enough to see the world change, she said. And long enough to know when it hasn't changed enough. She walked up the aisle, stopping just beside Olivia. What you did today took more strength than most adults I've ever known. Olivia blinked, her voice soft. Thank you, ma'am. No, the woman said gently. Thank you. Keep that strength. Because the world will keep testing you. As she walked back to her seat, the cabin seemed to fall into another respectful hush. Even the attendants moved with more awareness, less autopilot, more presence. And then a buzz. Elijah's phone vibrated again. A message from his father. Skyline is publishing a statement tomorrow. They've confirmed a formal apology and are launching a passenger dignity initiative in your names. You'll see it in the headlines. Stay steady. This is bigger than us now. Olivia read it over her brother's shoulder. She didn't smile. Instead, she whispered, Do you think this will make people think we were just trying to be famous? Elijah shrugged. Let them think what they want. We didn't do it for them. We did it because someone had to. She nodded and fell into thoughtful silence. In row 3A, Karen Mitchell still hadn't touched her food. Her tray remained full, utensils unused. Her stare was blank, not angry anymore but lost, confused. She clutched her handbag like a lifeline, but no one reached for her. It wasn't punishment. It wasn't vengeance. It was just consequence. For the first time, Karen Mitchell had faced the limits of her influence, and found herself on the wrong side of a truth she could no longer ignore. Her voice, once the loudest in the cabin, was now just another soundless presence in a place she no longer controlled. When the plane began its descent, the lights dimmed further. The intercom chimed on. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain James Patterson. We'll be landing in approximately 20 minutes. Please ensure your seat belts are fastened and your tray tables are secured. And thank you. For your patience, for your decency, and for showing today what dignity really looks like. There was no applause. Just silence. And respect. As the plane touched down on the San Francisco runway, the jolt of the wheels meeting ground felt like the final punctuation to a story still unfolding beyond the pages of policy. The moment the aircraft stopped at the gate, phones came alive. Screens lit up. Notifications buzzed. Olivia's lock screen showed a news alert. Skyline Airways issues statement after viral first-class incident. We failed, but we are listening. Beneath it, the subheadline. Teen siblings refuse to give up seats to elite member. Airline launches reforms. She looked at Elijah. Viral already. Didn't even post a thing, he murmured. They didn't need to. The truth had flown on its own. The jet bridge extended. The doors opened with a soft click. The scent of airport air, slightly metallic, recycled, yet grounding, swept into the first-class cabin as the crew prepared to deboard. But no one rushed to exit. For the first time on any flight they'd ever taken, the passengers in the premium cabin simply waited. Not for baggage. Not for priority. But for Elijah and Olivia Carter. The two teens stood slowly, gathering their backpacks with quiet composure. They didn't look triumphant, and they certainly didn't smile for cameras, though several phones were discreetly raised. They simply turned and moved toward the exit, walking the same aisle they had once been asked to leave. Only now the walk was theirs. Halfway up, Harold gave them a respectful nod. The Freedom Rider woman gave them a gentle touch on the arm as they passed. Even the woman from 2C stood, hand over heart. Thank you, she said again. Karen Mitchell remained seated. She didn't speak. She didn't move. The shine in her eyes had dulled, not from humiliation, but from the realization that this time, her power couldn't shield her from consequence. Elijah glanced back once. Just for a second. But he said nothing. Because sometimes dignity is not what you say, but what you choose not to. They stepped off the plane, not into applause but into something far rarer, real respect. Waiting at the gate was a suited representative from Skyline Airways, flanked by two public relations staffers and a professional photographer. Elijah recognized one of them from a Forbes article about corporate ethics. Mr. and Miss Carter, the lead rep said, offering his hand. On behalf of our executive board, I want to personally thank you for your grace and strength. You didn't just defend yourselves. You've helped us see where we need to change. We don't need awards, Olivia replied gently. Just change. You have our word, the man said. And not just words, policies. Public ones. Transparent ones. They handed over 2 envelopes, each marked with the Skyline crest. Inside were letters of apology, lifetime upgrade guarantees, and statements confirming the termination of privileges for Karen Mitchell. But that wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was that the system finally had listened. Across the country in the hours that followed, the story spread like a fire fed by truth. Teen siblings hold first-class seats and dignity against airline elitism. Skyline suspends crew after bias allegations. Michael Carter's children quietly shift national conversation on flying while black. By the end of the week, the airline had implemented a new protocol: passenger integrity protection, including real-time escalation response, discrimination de-escalation training, and a mandatory review board when elite members challenge booked seats. Elijah and Olivia's experience became the centerpiece of the company's internal ethics training. But for them, the biggest change happened not in a headline. It happened the next morning in the backyard of their New York home, as the wind rustled through trees and news cameras camped across the street, hoping for a glimpse. Their father stood across from them, arms crossed, face stern, but proud. "You stood taller than I ever have in a boardroom," he said. "And you didn't raise your voice once." "I didn't want to embarrass you," Elijah admitted. Michael smiled. "You didn't? You honored every lesson I ever taught you." "People are calling us brave," Olivia murmured. "But I just feel tired." Michael knelt, placing a hand on her shoulder. "That's what courage feels like," he said. "Not loud. Not glorious. Just necessary." The wind blew softly. A bird called in the distance. And for the first time in 48 hours, the world slowed enough to let them breathe. Later, on the porch, Elijah sat with his sister, both sipping juice in the early sun. "You think anything really changed?" Olivia asked, gaze fixed on the sidewalk. Elijah thought for a long moment before replying. "I think some people will still look at us and see kids. Or black. Or both. But maybe now, some of them will stop and think before they speak. Maybe the next Karen won't be so quick to assume. And maybe the next crew member won't stay silent." She nodded. "And that's enough?" "For now," Elijah said. "But we're not done. We just took the first flight." Olivia smiled softly, leaning back in her chair. "I like that. They didn't post a video. They didn't write a blog. They didn't call the press. But their story had already done what the loudest voices often fail to do. It sparked reflection without demanding praise. And somewhere out there, on another plane, in another cabin, someone would remember two teenagers who didn't argue, didn't fight, didn't scream, but who made the world pause and reconsider what fairness really looks like. Not because they were rich. Not because they were powerful. But because they didn't back down. Not 1 inch. In a world where privilege often shouts loudest, Elijah and Olivia Carter proved that dignity can be louder still, without ever raising your voice. They reminded us that silence in the face of injustice is complicity, but strength in silence, grounded in truth, can change systems. And perhaps most importantly, they showed that you don't have to be older to be wise or powerful to be heard. If we don't speak up, someone else will keep suffering in silence. Olivia Carter. This story moved you? Share it. Leave a comment about a time you chose to speak up, or wish you had. Subscribe to True Echo for more stories that expose, inspire, and remind us all what justice really looks like.